So welcome to this week's episode of Leaders on a Mission, where I'm joined by inspiring leaders driven by the impact of creating a healthy and sustainable world. Now, in today's episode, I'm joined by Aidan Connolly, global executive who's dedicated his career to the animal nutrition industry. Now, Aidan has worked in over 100 countries, living in 6 of them. He speaks 5 languages. He's a CEO of an innovative early stage ag tech company, is a Forbes commentator and adjunct professor of marketing, and has just finished writing a book. So Aidan, look, thanks very much for joining me on the show today. It's a pleasure to have you on.
I mean, I think after that introduction, we should stop there. I think you've done such a fantastic job. I don't even want to say anything.
Well, I actually had to stop halfway there. It could have gone on for a little bit longer, actually. I mean, there were a few things that I didn't include as well, but you know, it's great to have you on. And the first thing when looking at all of that is, where'd you find the time for all these things? You know, it's an incredible kind of array of business kind of activities. You must have a laser focus on delegation and a laser focus on your approach, really.
Yeah, I suppose not differently than anybody else. Every time I want to get something done, I give it to somebody in my team who's a busy person. They say busy people get more done, even though in theory they don't have the time. I think surrounding yourself by good people, no question. Working hard, unfortunately, is part of it as well. There are no shortcuts, but it's everything I do, I enjoy, and everything I've been involved with, I've got a certain passion for. I know that's an overused word at the moment, but I really enjoy what I do, and that makes it easy to take on all of the tasks you've talked about.
Absolutely. And let's take it all the way back then, thinking about that kind of passion. You know, let's think about some of the kind of key influences as you were growing up on a young kind of Aidan that really helped shape your kind of ideals, really.
Yeah, I came from what would you call a middle-class background in Dublin in Ireland. Lucky enough that my father was posted overseas to Bahrain in the Middle East. That led the family to emigrate there for a couple of years when I was 10 years of age. And interestingly, for myself and my 2 sisters, we've all worked in overseas environments since then. So clearly we got the bug for being something other than being in Ireland for the rest of our lives. And I think that was a very significant influence. I've always really enjoyed business. I had lots of plans about what I was going to be when I grew up. And then I read a book called In Search of Excellence, which shows my age. And I appreciate some people have said subsequently all those companies went out of business. But the fact was, it was a great read. And I came back, I just read it and I said to myself, that's what I want to do. I really enjoy the idea of turning around businesses. I really enjoy the idea of solving business problems. I really enjoy figuring out, I suppose, how to make money, not necessarily to become rich, but because that's a way of measuring success and failure. So at an early age, that was a major part of what I did. Joined a company which had been set up by an uncle of mine, Alltech. He was tremendously successful in his own right. Started a company with $10,000 when he had moved to the United States. So he started his own company with only $10,000, and when I joined him, the turnover was already 24 million. And when he died, sadly, about 3 years ago, turnover had grown to 2.4 billion, and my cousin Mark took over the business, and that it continues to go from strength to strength. So those would be 3 major influences, I'd say: the overseas experience, the nirvana moment of I want to be in business, and then joining Alltech and seeing the world with them, going to over 100 countries, learning different languages, setting up businesses around the world. That was tremendously significant in terms of who I am today.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you know what I find really fascinating looking at you and your background? The fact that you spent like 28 years or so with one company, knowing how much interest and curiosity you have in so many different things. You know, to find the breadth and the variety in the different countries and the different positions and the different roles, clearly as part of a growing company would have had to have been so important to keep you so engaged and keep you so interested in working for a company. That's what I find interesting.
Yeah, well, that comes down to leadership as well. And in the case of my uncle, he was a PhD who loved sales, loved marketing, loved jumping on airplanes, going to see people, loved, again, the business of business. So that passion transferred itself into every employee, including myself. And I have to say, year one, I was a marketing executive in Ireland, a production person on a production line in a factory. I drove a truck. I worked on a farm. I was involved in sales to dairy farms. So suddenly in the first 12 months, I had all those experiences. And then he said, I think it was month number 11 or 12 in the job, he said, I understand you speak French. I said, look, I speak school French. Yeah, but no, your French sounds really good to me. I think we're going to move you to France to set up a business in France. And you're thinking, who would do that? But, you know, the cost to him was relatively low. He took a risk with a young person who, for probably in his mind, he either wanted to make or break. Luckily, it was the making of me. I learned French really well. I had to. French people do speak English, as we all know, but they do prefer to do business in their own language. And I learned an immense amount in the 2 years I was there. I won't tell you what I succeeded in doing because the success wasn't great, but I did succeed in establishing in my own mind what I was capable of doing. And I had no fear after that of any other challenges. The next challenge was to go to Italy, which actually morphed into Brazil. And I was getting married at the time, so moved to Brazil. And there was involved in setting up a sales, marketing, research, production, regulatory, finance, so all the functions of a really big business, and then expanded into the rest of Latin America. So I think whatever else, Dr. Lyons is what he was known as, Pierce, as some of us got to call him, gave me my head, took big chances with me, which paid off. Maybe there weren't huge chances in the sense that they hadn't paid off. He could simply fire me. But I think as a leader, that's what you need to look to do with your people, is give them those same chances, take chances with them, particularly when they're young. It's a lot easier to lose. I learned French fluently. I learned Portuguese fluently. My Spanish is okay. I learned it because of being thrown into the deep end and having to survive.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that kind of mentorship and clearly he had a passion for seeing the kind of trends with people and and backing the right horses quite clearly. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to kind of grow his business that successfully. But quite interestingly, you seem to really love those challenges. What is it about going to a country where you don't know the language, you've never worked there, and it's kind of it's really kind of out of the comfort zone to a certain degree, isn't it?
I don't know what it is. Probably my mother dropped me on my head at some early age and something not quite wired correctly up here. But I saw my colleagues getting the same opportunities, and some of them floated and some of them drowned. And the ones who floated to the top became the board of directors that Dr. Lyons surrounded himself in Alltech. So if you looked around the board of directors, everybody had lived in another country, everybody had learnt another language, everybody had overcome a difficulty. So that in itself was, I think, very instructive about where the business was going and where he saw the business going and the opportunities he saw in young people. From an own personal perspective, it is now what I seek out. I don't seek the opportunity to push a pen, to fill out a budget, to be the person who is doing the routine work. It's not only that I'm not sure whether I'm the best or not best person at them. I know it doesn't drive me, it doesn't motivate me, and I know that I'm very good as a result of things most people don't like. So I seek those out preferentially, and then ideally surround myself with people that are good at the stuff that maybe that I won't enjoy as much, and probably is maybe a little bit easier to find people that really excel at that. So absolutely. But whenever a difficult customer meeting comes up, I volunteer. Whenever somebody's got a problem with, I volunteer. Whenever something has to be done that I've never done before, I really like to do those things and like to seek those out. And I think that's what leadership is about. It is about leading from the front and showing your troops you're prepared to do what other people won't.
Yeah, absolutely. But in a traditional, like if you think about the animal nutrition industry, or you think about the food and agricultural industry, traditionally they are quite, they are quite conservative businesses, for instance, and it's quite clear that you're really comfortable being uncomfortable. And not everyone is, not everyone's able to adapt and be in that situation. But how did you kind of cope with the pace, therefore, of maybe some of the adoption or the pace of some of your kind of ideas and methods and way of wanting to innovate and work, for instance, during your career?
It's not easy, as you say, because I think the status quo in the food business and agribusiness has been quite staid. We've been lucky, that's the wrong word, we've been unlucky with COVID, but lucky that we've had this once in a lifetime pandemic, which has accelerated. Somebody described it as being, it's like going into a vortex and being spat out the other end in 2030. That a lot of things that should have taken us 10 years to implement have happened very quickly. But why do people agree to change? That's a very difficult question in any business, and it's even more difficult in a business which has had, on a digital scale, on a true innovation scale, as little change as agriculture has. We're not doing the same thing as we did when we domesticated animals 8,000 years ago, but it's not that far off. There's a lot of similarities. So creating the conditions for change is absolutely essential. Helping to convince somebody that's been doing it one way to do it a different way is a real challenge. Now, the margins in the business are very small, very tight. That actually creates a greater desire for innovation. Consumers are becoming extremely vocal about what they want from their food. That's creating an opportunity for innovation. But technology itself, when you think about robots, drones, sensors, artificial intelligence itself, Internet of Things, virtual reality, augmented reality, 3D printing, these CRISPR gene editing, all of these technologies are exploding into the food business and have the capability of transforming, as I described the vortex of 10 years, we could be seeing a vortex of 30 years take place very soon as these technologies come to change every aspect of how food is produced.
Absolutely. This of where we are now on the journey, we think about maybe the innovation journey, or we think about agriculture itself. It feels, bearing in mind I've been in the industry for probably 7 years or so, it feels like a very exciting time. Do you have that sense as well? We are, at the point of there's no kind of turning back, and there are opportunities kind of to go after right now. Do you have that sense of excitement in terms of where we are?
Came off a week last week where I had to travel to see farms. We're in the food business, so we have certain dispensations that you don't have otherwise. And I went to see 5 of the top 11 dairy farms in the United States, and called 2 colleagues who joined me for different meetings. We were all traveling separately, so we had a discussion on Friday, and one of my colleagues said, "This is the most exciting week I've had in a 30-year career." And I'd have to agree with him. I was incredibly motivated by what I saw happening on farms, genuine, massive changes taking place in the way the animals are being observed, the way the animals are being managed, the way food is being produced. And all good things, not just in terms of, making a little bit more money on the farm, but also good things from a sustainability perspective, also good things from an animal welfare perspective. And I know the crop business, and indeed even the food retail business, are seeing the same changes. But when you think of putting cameras into a barn and watching cows, maybe not that exciting. but digitizing the images, using artificial intelligence to interpret it, and providing on the phone of a farm, a producer, real insights that they can do something with 5 minutes later. That's just incredibly exciting. So yes, if I was a young person like yourself, or another person maybe coming out of college, and you're thinking about, is this the business to stay in or go into? I think it's got to be as exciting as any business out there at the moment. The level of change that we're seeing is incredible.
No, absolutely. And the kind of imagery you speak about, the artificial intelligence, that's the tools and the technology deploy on behalf of Cainthus. So I should say that you're CEO of Cainthus, and the business is a very kind of specific technology in this space.
Yeah, that's correct. So I'm the CEO of Cainthus. We've a team of about 60 people. Interestingly, the primary group working on the algorithms and the engineering are based in Dublin, in Ireland. And most of the commercial work today is in the US, although we're also seeing growth in the Middle East, of all places. So Cainthus works on dairy cows. It watches dairy cows 24 hours a day using these cameras, and then digitizes and creates. At the same time, on the farms, I'm seeing them putting cowbells on, or Fitbits onto the legs of the cows to watch how much time they spend walking around, even detecting when they come into heat, so when they're ready to become pregnant. We're seeing robots being used to milk cows, because it's increasingly hard to find people to milk cows. You would have thought milking cows is a fantastic career, but not everybody wants to do it anymore, and et cetera, et cetera. So those are the sorts of changes. Cainthus is at the forefront of that, but there are many, many other companies arriving into all forms of livestock and crop production with really phenomenal new ideas.
Oh, no, excellent. And just tell me around that. It sounds brilliant. So it's artificial intelligence and kind of data analytics for cows, essentially, really, in terms of to monitor the movements and the behaviors of cows, as it were, to gather valuable insights. And I mean, it sounds fascinating. Tell me, the adoption from the farmer, are they able to use the data? What kind of insights are they able to kind of really get that helps them on the farm?
So we're on larger farms. Typically, we will go to smaller farms later, but we've decided to start with larger farms. The pictures allow you to see the cows and the feed all the time. The first thing we did was we got the AI system. We taught it how to recognize feed. So I've got my CTO, Jane. She has a PhD from Yale, and she worked on the Hadron Collider particle accelerator in Switzerland at CERN. So I said to her, Jane, you know, this is amazing. We're able to recognize feed particles on the cement floor in front of a cow. This is rocket science. And she said, Aidan, I've done rocket science. Rocket science is a lot easier than this. This is not rocket science. This is harder than rocket science. So that's the level that we're at. We're doing things that have never been done before. We may or may not get the Nobel Prize for this. I wouldn't hold my breath. But the level of science we're engaged in, the level of innovation is quite extraordinary. And the people we're hiring are, they're based in Dublin, but they're from all over the world. We have Brazilians, Indians, we've Russians, we've Spanish, Italians, we've every nationality you can imagine in a group of, in that core group of 50 working on the algorithms. Now, the second part we're looking at now is actually watching the behavior of cows, seeing how much time they lie down. Mightn't seem like a big thing to the non-ag person, but a cow that lies down for an hour longer every day produces about 2 kilos, 4 pounds extra milk, has a lower carbon footprint, has better welfare, lives longer. So suddenly you're into a lot of different dynamic things, metrics, which have huge implications for the planet, for the producer, for people. Suddenly we're into a lot of things that have never ever been done before. And teams just incredibly motivated, when they get up in the morning to go and start working on this sort of work, because you are actually changing the world.
It sounds very exciting. It really does. And tell me, can the technology be applied? No doubt it can be applied to other species or other groups, as it were. Is there a plan or future to take the technology into and broaden it out into other sectors?
Yeah, so technology could be used for any animals, could be used for goats and sheep, could be used for fish, could be used for pigs, could be used for chickens. Um, I suppose one of the things I learned from my time in Alltech was that as much as it's hard to come up with ideas, to come up with new, novel, original innovations, and I'm not just talking about products, but also even sales and marketing ideas, administrative ideas, people management ideas. It's also very hard to implement them because a lot of people lose focus when they start to generate all those ideas. And when you're in an entrepreneurial environment, such as Alltech was and Cainthus is, for me, you have to learn how to focus. So as a leader and in combination with my COO, Steve Kickard, we've just preached over and over again, let's do one thing right. Let's get one thing absolutely right. And almost like those old Venn diagrams or concentric circles, then from there start to expand into what you do next. So that's the sense that we have, is that even as a startup, we can change everything in the world, but we won't without focus. And that focus is absolutely essential if we're going to be successful, if we're going to achieve what we think we can achieve without running out of money, and equally building the future, which will obviously pay for everything else. So pigs, chickens, other animals, absolutely in our roadmap, beef, cows, goats, sheep, of where we want to go to. But at this stage, very, very hyper focused on dairy as being the first success that we've seen and the first success we intend to dominate.
Great. So you speak very much about the mission, for instance, and you talk about very much your kind of passion with that. Is that something that has been with? Is that something that was very much part of Alltech, for instance, and something that's been with you as it was throughout your career and a career within kind of agriculture?
Yeah, I think that having this greater sense of purpose is always important for people. Much as the leaders of an organization, and I've helped raise money for different ag tech and food tech companies around the world. I think we've done it now through Agri-Tech Capital. I've done it now with about 10 companies. I've advised some major corporations. But as companies get bigger, the tendency is for the leadership to understand entirely what the mission is, to understand entirely what the vision is, to have very good clarity over. But as it trickles down, it just becomes more and more diffuse. And in the end, you have lots of people who are coming to work quintessentially 9 to 5 without just any real clarity over what the purpose is, what they're trying to achieve, what the organization's purpose is. And maybe that's good. Maybe not everybody does need to understand everything about changing the world. But we have had, particularly in Cainthus, it's been very clear to me, and there are some people saying some pretty bad things about the food system, about farming, about agriculture, which you need to push back against. But when you're hiring people who don't come from a farming background, which is what we are doing, you need to make clear to them why this is a good company to work for. And in the old days, I remember when I came out of college, I didn't want to work for a cigarette company because I didn't like what they did. So somebody coming to join us, I feel, needs to appreciate what we're doing for the world. And if they do, they're not just going to be engaged with getting a salary and doing a job and writing some interesting algorithms. They're actually going to be engaged with, this is something momentous that I'm doing that I won't get a chance in my life to do again. I think that's very, very important for every business. Some businesses, it's easier than others. Some, do bring in consultants and they come up with the mission and vision, and sometimes it feels very false. But when it fits, when it works, it's really incredibly binding. It's the glue that keeps everybody together. It's a glue that sticks the team when things aren't going so well. And things, certainly in startup world, things are definitely not going to go well. You're going to have days when you're when you regret you made your choices that you did to maybe even start on the process. But larger corporations, like Alltech, harder to do, but Alltech continued to maintain, all the way through to today, at the sense of where it had come from. And again, maybe enough people had done the hard yards of going out there and doing things themselves, driving those trucks, making those deliveries, setting up a stand at a booth at a trade show, speaking to customers on the phone that aren't happy. Those are things that bind you all together.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Tell me, have you seen anything which, you spoke about as companies sometimes get bigger, the power of that message can sometimes dissipate a little bit. Have you seen examples which companies have used to really keep everyone engaged as they kind of grow? What have you seen kind of work well in that regard?
Very, very, very hard. And I think, ironically, and I always hated it as a management technique, but the older style managers would sometimes create crises. And you'd look at the crisis and say, this is not a crisis. Why are we? But actually, what they were trying to do is engender the energy that comes from a crisis to create change, to get people to realize this isn't good enough. We need to do things differently. The pandemic has done that. But we've seen other examples, many other examples, business examples of where things happen. I'm not going to name them, but in the food business, excuse me for a second here. In the food business, I saw one older established company being taken over by another established company. And the older company that's being acquired was quite self-satisfied and felt that nothing needed to change and thought, we're being acquired because we're doing such a fantastic job. And the new company coming in had spent a lot of money and was clearly expecting to make change. So I was interested to see how they would handle it. And on day one, they created a company newsletter that said things are not going well. And then they created teams to look at how they could cut costs. And they started canceling the delivery of newspapers. They started canceling the automatic right to have coffee for free at the machine. And these were all, in my view, dumb things because we weren't saving very much money this way. If your company's really in crisis. But the change in mentality was amazing. Within a month, people started saying, well, maybe we are lazy. Maybe we have been not careful enough. Maybe we do need focus. Maybe we do need to realize we are being outcompeted by competitors. So engendering a crisis in a positive way and getting the energy that comes from that, I think is absolutely critical in order to revive, regenerate, grow again. Otherwise, the tendency is to use the examples from 10, 20, 30 years ago and say, it worked for us then, reinvent that, go back to that, or keep going the way we're going, and we'll get that 20, 30% growth for an established company, 100% growth for a startup, and of course it doesn't work.
Yeah. Which probably explained why you went on to write your book. I would have thought it probably keys in quite a lot with 2143, right? And some of your
Well, fortunately I do have it here right by my side. So 2143 was very much about that. How do you tell people how to get growth back into their business? And most businesses, as you know, grow by 2%, 3%, 5% a year, and the stock market's happy and everybody looks at the bottom line. But the bottom line is a consequence of the top line. Top line is sales. So bottom line is profit. Profits come from sales. If your sales are dying, your company will die eventually as well, sooner or later. So I got a lot of those people that say, Aidan, tell me what happened at Alltech. Tell me what happened with other companies you've worked with, other startups. Explain to me what makes some companies successful at continuing that growth and some not. And I've been using this technique called 2143. And most of my business plans, like everybody else's, were written in a form that's 1, 2, 3, 4, which means start with the history, then talk about today, then focus on the road we're on, and then finally talk about where we're going to end up as a destination. And that's my plan for next year. And the realization that if you want disruptive planning, if you want to end up in a different destination, if you want to get transformative growth, change the order of your plan. Don't write about the history, write about today. So start with 2, not with 1. Address the 1, which is the history, shortly, succinctly, as a consequence of where we are today. So do that as your second part. And then instead of telling me which road you're on and what destination you're going to get to, tell me what destination you want, and then tell me what roads we should be taking, which is a reversal of the 3 and the 4. So as simple as it is, and I don't know, I must have done it 100 times with totally different businesses, including even universities and government organizations. And every single time we do it, we end up with extraordinary ideas, which leads to extraordinary results. The book is available on Amazon, 2143. Books available from the publisher there in the UK, Context, on their website. In fact, last time I checked, they were offering it for an incredible price of £10, $15 a copy. But I can't, it's what I recommend people to do. If you're stuck in the mud, if you're not sure how to get your business going again, just try this process. I've obviously done a lot of workshops with people to help them through it, but it's not difficult. It's also interesting to me, another one of those lessons, when we're doing it, we have the team of 8, 10 people sitting around the table, or 10 or 12. I always start by asking people where we are and where we came from. I always ask the most junior person first, which apparently is the technique used by the British Army in a court-martial. They start by taking the most junior person, because they know if the general or the speaks first, then everybody's going to say, yes, sir, agree with him or her. Whereas if you start with the most junior, you're probably more likely to get, and then work your way from the most junior to the most senior, you're much more likely to get honest answers. And honesty within the process is also a real challenge.
Absolutely. Tell me, does it apply equally to, say, a startup or an innovation business as it does with a business you are trying to transform?
Of course, with a larger corporation, you have more history, you have more now, you have more pieces. Startups, I've used it with very successfully, especially in year 2, year 3, year 4, where maybe they get to a certain point. What it tends to do, again, is focus the mind on what our destination is. And what's interesting to me is the destination the team may be working towards is not necessarily the destination that you actually know is the one that's critical for the future of the business. Did one recently with Cainthus. We went through the process of all the things we were doing, where the roads were going to lead to, and then stopped, went back and said, okay, where would we like to end up? And realized that we had one specific feature, which if it wasn't delivered on, we're going to lose our largest customer. If we lose our largest customer, we don't grow, we don't progress, and possibly we end up losing our other customers as well. And that was really a light bulb moment for the team. They're saying, what do you mean this is no, this is an existential threat to the future of Cainthus. If we don't solve this, we don't solve that. And then we don't continue. And all resources, all the headlights, all the beams, all went straight onto that problem. And within 6 weeks, they'd solved it. Whereas probably without that level of focus, we could have been having that same meeting 6 months later and in a much more serious situation where possibly even might have lost the customer. So it's that level of insight. And I could give, insights from the bakery I worked with the feed companies I worked with various companies involved in food tech, and 2143 has been just an incredibly powerful process for all of them.
Oh, it sounds wonderful. It sounds like it's it could really kind of make the change. Essentially, it really does. It sounds great. Tell me, how long did it take you from the idea to having it right now in your hand, for instance? How long? What was the process like?
Went on a course in Harvard for leadership, and somebody said, when you set out to write a book, you need to be honest with yourself about how long it's going to take. I should have listened to him. I wrote the book on a trip to China, family trip. I was there for 2.5 weeks. So I wrote 80% of the book quite quickly. And then it took me another 2 years with carrying it around in a briefcase with no more improvements. And then beginning of a year, sat down with a woman I worked with, Alexa Pataki, and said, we're just going to get this done. And it took about 12 months from there. Now, some might say, so that was probably, say that that's a 4-year process. I would say that the key piece for me was probably the book when it came out of China was not ready to be published. There were parts that just had to mature in my mind, germinate. I had to get more examples of, I did a lot of stuff in Alltech with 2143 and it worked like a dream. But I then started using it with other examples, other people, friends, family, contacts, people who said I've got an issue, and I was able to use it in that situation. So probably it was good that it took 4 years to write, but these people that can sit down and write a novel in 3 months, I marvel at them, and I appreciate writing a novel is different than writing nonfiction. But I think it was definitively, it was a good thing we took the time to get it right, because I've looked back at it subsequently and I haven't felt the need to rewrite it.
Great. No, great. It sounds like it was a worthwhile process, basically.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. Tell me, when you think about some of the kind of trends, really interesting. We've seen the kind of trend around the vegan revolution, for instance, and everyone going kind of plant-based, kind of crazy. And you've indicated there, for instance, around some of the farmers and the dairy cow farmers, for instance, being able to address some of the kind of issues and challenges when it comes to the environment and climate change. I think my question is, when you think about farmers and you think about the challenges on the farm, are they as, this whole dynamic around environmental and sustainability, how much of an impact is it having on kind of processes and production on the farm itself? And do you see, how do you see that evolving, I think, over the next few years?
Well, sustainability has become really almost like a stick to beat farmers with, and which is a pity because they're highly sustainable. As of yet, I haven't seen anybody convert grass into a burger substitute. Cows can eat grass, we can't. There's no other animal that can. We're looking at things, different types of enzymes, et cetera. What you end up with in order to replace a burger is you replace it with soybean and a lot of additives. And as I read through that list of what else goes into the fake burger, I don't feel happy eating that, because last time I checked with my doctor, he wants me to eat cleaner, purer food that comes from single source, not come from something that's highly processed. That doesn't mean that won't come, but I gravely doubt that we'll be able to do so, at the speed that you imagine. They are talking about fermentation of milk. You can certainly produce milk solids different in a fermenter tank. You add in sugar, you use a genetically modified yeast, and you get this genetically modified yeast juice, which they call milk. I don't feel happy with that. I mean, I'm nothing against, I know GMs are not the bad thing everybody says they are, but I'm trying to figure out, why would I not just drink cow's milk? Why do I need to drink something that came out of a fermenter with all of that extra science, but still, why would I do that? The argument over the environment is a real one, but when you do life cycle analysis and you see the cows producing methane and the grass is taking it back up, and we've got this virtuous carbon cycle, there are changes can happen in farming that could reduce or could make us carbon neutral very quickly, probably within the next 3 or 4 years. And where we are at the moment is not as bad. The things we need to do to change the environment are burn less fuel, use less electricity. Sadly, the things that have happened during COVID of us all being online just means we're using more electricity, and obviously building buildings with cement, etc., traveling on airplanes. Lots of things that need to be done before we start addressing some of the things that seem to feature in the newspapers all the time. I think that we probably do eat too much animal protein. Certainly we do in the West. I think we all have to reduce it. I think most of us understand that. If we're being honest with ourselves, we eat too much in general. We're eating too many calories, too much of everything. We need to learn to live with less. And I think that people are familiar with that. But I think beating up on animal agriculture is completely unfair, unreasonable. The productivity of farms grows by 2% a year consistently. They're using less pesticides, less herbicides, less antibiotics, almost completely eliminated in Europe and increasingly in the United States from the food systems. So you look at all these things that are happening in livestock farming, and replacing that, in my view, by soybeans that may or may not have come from a rainforest and have to be further processed with lots of food additives. I don't think that doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah. I mean, it really is a fascinating force, really, within consumers. On the one hand, natural products, but on the other hand, the sustainable kind of solutions for animal welfare and are taking people down this process road, as it were, as well. So there's like two forces that are really diametrically kind of opposed. And I'm just curious to see how things are going to kind of pan out over the next kind of 5 or 10 years, as there's so much drive towards the vegan revolution. And there's so much kind of talk about, from a farming viewpoint, people, there's a lot of negative press, around that, as it were. And I'm just wondering if this is just going to continue, or we're going to find a nice happy medium where there's good solutions from vegan solutions, and there's also, natural dairy solutions as well.
Well, probably today, 3 billion people live in urban environments, and we're supported by something like 200 million farmers. So the stories that beat up on farmers are very popular in the press, particularly in countries like the UK, where, I don't know, less than 1% of people actually work in the food business, agriculture. Even in the country I'm from, Ireland, it's now less than 5%. So the ratio, who do you write your story on? Do you tell somebody to not go on holidays to Spain because it's bad for the environment, or do you tell them to stop eating meat? The not eating meat is an easy story. I think that we're definitely going to see more and more vegetarianism. That's a given. I think we're going to see more flexitarianism, people eating some of one and some of the other, depending on days of the week and times of the day. That's a given. And I think even we're going to see these hybrids where meat products, in the further processed, meat and non-meat are combined together to make some meat light substitutes or alternatives. I don't think that's necessarily the case. Countries like China, Brazil, Africa, where food consumption continues to grow because they're, for the most part, Brazil maybe not the example, but they're still below what we're used to in the West. So be careful about what I read in the UK, US press, because it isn't necessarily representative of the rest of the world. But again, I don't think these challenges are unreasonable. I think, if anything, they encourage farmers to tell their story better. They put pressure on the system to be more transparent, to be more sustainable. And I know, again, some of my farming friends have said, I hate the word sustainability, but regenerative agriculture has become a phrase that we're using more and more. And it's a very powerful phrase that I think everybody likes and everybody understands, which is regenerating our soils, our planet, our environment through the food system. That's a very powerful and positive aspiration, I think, for all of us. We're certainly on the road there. Sustainability has been a bit of a stick to beat the business with, but regenerative agriculture might be the carrot to bring it out the other side.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. No, that's great. And also, I think with your background and experience as well, it's some of the challenges I sometimes find talking to early stage technology orientated companies is more about the deployment and more about the relationship with the kind of farmer. And I'm just curious in, when you think about the depth and breadth of these early stage startups, for instance, and some of the technologies you've mentioned earlier, How excited, how excited are you for the future of new technology and adoption around it?
Well, look, so I'll name the ones I know that brings a bias to it because they're friends or people I've been involved with. But I'm involved with a company here in North Carolina. They've got a natural product to replace Roundup and other herbicides. I don't know how good it is, but even the idea of it is amazing, that you could use a combination of essential oils, plant extracts, and start to control weeds, and maybe even combine it with herbicides so that when the herbicide doesn't kill, you can add this on top and you can use in combination. So that's just a mind-blowing. You see the $16 billion lawsuit that's occurred up in California from people suing over that. That's a tremendous opportunity. There are startups working with the soil microbiome. So how do you put back in, if you like, probiotic strains into the soil so the soil starts to become fantastic? Data company out of Australia I've been working with. They are collecting information for farmers. They provide it to you on an iPad. You can manage an extensive system where you've got your livestock all over a very large farms and you're able to manage in real time what's happening. Cainthus, talked about that already a lot, won't mention them again, but extraordinarily, another company working with analyzing milk and finding in real time what the protein, the fat, but even what the somatic cells, which indicates that the cow has a mastitis infection. And you can mine milk for lots of things and find out in real time what's coming from. I don't know. I mean, it could continue. There's just company after company after company out there. And of course, as you can tell, I get a little bit too enthusiastic. I want to invest in everybody. I want to help everybody. I have nearly 30,000 contacts, people following me on LinkedIn. And I view that as being, an opportunity to connect people with people. I'm not trying to hold it for myself. I try to, when I'm on Twitter, I try to show pictures of things I've seen to say, here's something you might consider doing yourself in your country. The bakery I've worked with in Dublin, they're looking at taking food waste from the bakery, 3D printing it into other food products. I mean, that's just amazing. That's how to use the technology to solve that bakery's been around for 150 years. I'm sure that the founder never even imagined what a 3D printer would look like. So that's for me, that's the excitement of where this is all going.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's hugely exciting, and look, I loved having you on the show and having the opportunity of discussing all this with you. Thanks so much for coming on. Really enjoyed it.
Pleasure's all mine. Thank you, Simon.